Daniel chapter 11 is where we are tonight. Daniel chapter 11. All right, so a few things. Number one, we're kind of winding down on Daniel, and we had talked about doing Revelation, but my brain is a little apocalypsed out. I just made that word up, by the way. Apocalypse. So what I thought was we would study something else just to kind of move our attention for just a little while and then come back to it. Now that we've had some dealings with apocalyptic literature, it won't be as difficult, but I feel like if we move into 22 chapters of apocalyptic literature straight off of Daniel, about 3 chapters in, you're going to shoot me. So it's there. We'll study one thing and then we'll come back to it. But I just think it would be better for all of us if we just kind of take a break and then look back into it. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be yet. Let's see. Okay, so chapters 10 through 12 are the final vision, okay? In chapter 10, which we looked at a couple weeks ago, Daniel is informed, that is, an angel comes to him, or a divine being, whether it's an angel, whether it's the second member of the Godhead, whoever it may be, they inform him of something. Now we learn what he revealed to him, and there's some time that elapses, and we learn what was revealed to him as he tries to communicate, or as he communicates it to us now in chapters 11 and 12. So, this chapter is historically heavy. And so that kind of puts us at a difficulty in figuring about how to go about this. And I say that because, number one, most of us are not familiar with intertestamental history, okay? That's not a shot at anybody. I don't assume people are at home reading intertestamental history, okay? If I hadn't had to have it in school, I probably never would have read it, right? It's just some things we do because of the nature of our professions. So, let me just illustrate this way. In verses 5 through 35, there are more than 130 prophetic historical predictions. Okay? 130. So if we went through and spent time talking about and trying to dissect every little thing, I feel like we'd get lost in the overall scope of what is going on. And that's not something that I want to happen. I would recommend to you strongly the workbook that we had at the beginning. Whitworth gives us he gives you a more detailed discussion of some of these things and can help you put some of the details into perspective. And so we're going to look at it, but not on the just flat out detailed pinpoint historical analysis of everything that goes on, because that's, we could be here for weeks looking at all of those things. So we're going to kind of hit, and I'm going to share with you an outline in a little bit of the chapter. And really the outline is kind of what I want us to walk away with. It's just 3 points that kind of summarize the movement of what is going on. And I think if we can get those 3 points, and furthermore, the historical nature of this, being able to recite the history of it, that's all fine and good. But it's not, the historical nature is not exactly the point of it either. Okay? The point of it, as with all of these chapters in the second half, is you've got people who exalt themselves against God. God's people are caught in the middle, and he's telling them to be faithful in the midst of it. That's the overarching principle that dominates these chapters. So even if we can go through and we can nail down everything historically speaking, which I'm pretty convinced we can, we sometimes can miss the greater point, and that's not what we want to do. We don't want to turn into Pharisees where we're debating on how many angels can stand or can fit on the head of a pin. Those were things that they debated. Did Adam have a belly button? Well, who cares? It means nothing. So learning to pay attention to the overall thrust and message is the most important thing. And like I say, if you want to see some of the details, Whitworth doesn't go into complete detail, but he goes into pretty good detail. So I would recommend that to you as we go forward. All right, so here is kind of a summary before we get into the outline of what is going on. There's a mention of the Persian Empire, which is in control at the time Daniel gives this information, but it quickly shifts to the Greek Empire. And even more specifically, there's going to be a discussion of it's interesting, there's a common phrase that is used. You've got the king of the north and the king of the south. Those phrases are used over and over again. And so we're looking at the Greek Empire. And so the kings of the south, they go under this heading Ptolemy. So the rulers were the Ptolemies, okay? And that was one of Alexander's generals, and so that came to dominate. So Ptolemy so-and-so, Ptolemy so-and-so, like the name Herod or Pharaoh or Caesar or anything along those lines. It came to be a ruling title. All right? And the Ptolemies, and I'll show you a map in just a minute, but the Ptolemies ruled the area of Egypt and a little bit south of Alexander's empire. Then you have the king of the north, which are the Seleucids, and their kings many times will go under the title of Antiochus. Okay, we've talked about Antiochus IV several times, but their rulers will go by that. Now, they ruled the area of like Syria, which is northeast of Palestine, all the way over to Babylon. Now, to kind of put this in perspective, so in the congregational study plan, we're going through Acts. And there are two major influential congregations in the book of Acts. One is the church at Jerusalem. And then as things shift and go global in their scope, the church at Antioch becomes a highly important congregation. That's where Paul is sent on his missionary journeys. You have Antioch in Syria and Antioch of Pisidia. Antioch in Pisidia is located in what is modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor. Antioch of Syria, okay, is northeast of Palestine. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, where do you get the name Antioch from? Antiochus. Okay? The same way you get Alexandria, Egypt, from Alexander the Great. And so one of the things I hope to point out, we won't make it all the way through the chapter tonight probably, but one of the things I hope for us to point out is to see, I want us to highlight 5 or 6 things here that come to us that shed light on things in the New Testament. And one of them is the Antiochus and the naming of Antioch after Antiochus. There's also things that happen in a city that's called by one name, but by the time of the New Testament, its name is changed to Caesarea Philippi, which is where Peter makes his great confession. We see the mention, and next week when I talk about these, you can pretend you never heard them. We see the mention of the Hasidic Jews, which are thought to be precursors to the Pharisees in the New Testament era. Okay? And so all of these things are learning to connect the dots. And once we start connecting the dots, and the Old Testament is daunting to a great many of people, and I understand why. But once you start to see how the Old Testament influences the New, and how when you read the New, it's like the stories and the language of the Old has simply been used to repackage the message of the gospel. Everything just becomes like this really crystal clear picture. Okay? And so it can be very frustrating on the front end, but the benefits on the back end of it are quite extraordinary and can change the way you read the rest of the New Testament. So we're looking at those kings and Antiochus IV Epiphanes. A great portion, about half of the chapter, is a focus on him in particular. So that then leads us to this. Why are we talking about the kings of the north and the south? Because we saw this in chapter 8, Alexander's empire is divided amongst tons of people. So why does he only focus on the north and the south? Well, if the Ptolemies are ruling Egypt in the south and the Seleucids are ruling Syria in the north, what is in between them? It's Palestine. It's where the people of God live, okay? And so the reason why there's an emphasis here is because of the hostility that is going to exist between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, the south and the north, and where is the natural meeting ground? What is going to be something that is coveted there? Okay, the land of Palestine was a very prosperous place, and part of the reason for that was that it was the pathway to basically the rest of the world. Okay? So if you were coming from, okay, I'm going to try and do this from the way you would see this map, so this is going to be backwards to me, so this may not go well. So if the Mediterranean Sea is here, and then up here you've got Turkey and Asia Minor, and then it's coming down, and you travel down to Palestine, down to Africa, and on down, and then over here into Mesopotamia. Okay, well, if you're coming this way, and you're trying to go to Africa, you're going to have to go through Palestine. If you're coming from Africa north, or to go east or west, you're really going to have to go north through Palestine to go east or west. Okay? If you're coming from east or west to go south to Africa, you're going to have to go through Palestine. The point I'm trying to make is that Palestine is a hotbed highway. Okay? It's very coveted ground. There's a lot of stuff that transpires there. And so the people get caught many times just by their very location. They get caught in the hostilities of nations. And that continues to be true, even on a political scale today. Its location makes it a coveted piece of land. All right? And then, of course, the ultimate point is the triumph of God's people. So here's the map that I was talking about. And I don't have a pointer that's worth anything, a laser pointer dot, but you can see it there in the south in pinkish/purplish. That's the Ptolemaic kingdom. Just north, you see Palestine is purple with white lines, and then you see the Seleucid Empire is in a little bit darker. I don't know what color is that, like khaki color or something. And so you can see how their kingdoms, you see Palestine is directly caught in the middle, okay? And that's why the history focuses in on this point. And so the Old Testament is written from the perspective of the people of God, which is the Jewish people. It's not a universal history of every nation in the world, okay? So it's a very focused volume upon the people of God. All right. Any questions about that before we proceed a little bit further? Okay. So here's the basic idea of the chapter. In the first 4 verses, you got a lot of things that happen. You got a couple hundred years of time. Okay? The Persians fall to Alexander. Alexander falls, and then the Greeks divide. So after Alexander dies, he was the one who united them. After he dies, it's split up everywhere because he doesn't. So his wife is pregnant at the time of his death. He has an illegitimate son with someone else. He has a half-brother that is, from everything we can tell from the descriptions of him, he has some kind of a handicap. We're not exactly sure what it is, but it would have been very challenging for him to rule the kingdom. Okay. But anyway, it doesn't matter because they all end up being assassinated. Okay, the children those who are his children, and then his half-brother, and so there are no natural heirs. When you don't have that anymore, then it becomes just a power vacuum. Everybody's just kind of running for it. And so you've got generals and politicians and everybody just kind of fighting for that one position. And ultimately, no one man conquers it all. And that's why you have a division of the kingdoms like we saw between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So that happens kind of in the first 4 verses. And then in verses 5 through 19, So the Ptolemies and Seleucids decide, okay, we're going to get along. And that lasts for about 2 years. And they're like, no, I don't like that idea. And so then they start fighting each other. Okay? And they end up going to war. And that's the basic premise. I mean, we'll look at some of the details, but this is the premise. But ultimately, that gets us to this guy Antiochus, which the second half of Daniel has been almost, I hate to say exclusively, but almost exclusively talking about this guy. He's going to cause so many problems and his reign of terror is so significant that the Old Testament, or at least Daniel specifically, spends a lot of time talking about him. And when you read intertestamental literature like First Maccabees in particular, it's a history of all of this. And so the Maccabees are a family. They lead a Maccabean revolt, and that's where you get Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, feast days, things along those lines. So anyway, that's all intertestamental, and Jesus attends one of those feasts in John's Gospel. And so anyway, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a great persecutor of the church, or not the church, of the people of God in this particular context, and how they rise, or how he rises and then God puts him down without an issue. All right. Any questions or anything along those lines before we start looking? Okay. Okay, so I meant to bring that up. So this whole time period from about Alexander is 336 when he rises, so let's call it at his death 323. Okay, never mind. Scratch that. So the Persians don't fall until the mid-330s. And Antiochus is in the mid-100s BC, so like 150, 160, actually 160, 150, you count down. And so we're looking at a couple hundred years of history. And most of those years are skipped over in the first few verses with the fall of the Persian Empire. Anybody else? All right, so when we get into this, like I say, if you think I'm lost, okay, first of all, that puts you in really good company. I looked at this for like 6 hours today, and I've taught it and studied it I don't know how many times, and every time I do it, I have to go back, and it's painstaking detail. It's not... But if you can keep this in mind, and this is why I like outlines, because when I get lost in the midst of the details, I have to remember where I am and what's under discussion. And that kind of helps ground me in whatever is going on. So, he begins in verse 1 and says, "As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." So, now he begins that process of confirming and strengthening him by giving forth this vision, prophecy, however you choose to describe it. He says, "And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise who will rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, the kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. But not to his posterity, not according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others beside these." Okay, so in verse 2, 3 more kings shall arise. So following the one who is reigning at that moment, these 3 kings would be Cambyses, Samaridus, and Darius the First. Okay, so the 4th king that's mentioned here is the same king that you meet when you open Esther. Okay, this is the same king. He's far richer than them all. How does Esther open? He's throwing a feast that lasts like a year. He's extremely wealthy. Okay, so he decides he's going to invade Greece. And that's what he says. He has become strong through his riches. He shall stir up the kingdom of Greece. He decides he wants to invade Greece. And it seems like the parties and things of chapter 1 were him trying to win people over to his side to convince them to invade Greece. Okay? Now, he will invade them. He will not be successful. This guy is an egomaniac, if there ever was one. This is the guy that his engineers were building a bridge across, I forget exactly where it was. Maybe the Hellespont. They were building the bridge and it collapsed. So he had his men whip the river with chains. Whip the river with chains for not cooperating. Yeah, that's called certifiably crazy. Okay? That's who he is. He is met with stiff resistance by about 300 Spartans in Thermopylae. Eventually, in 480, he's defeated at the Battle of Salamis. But that is mentioned, I believe, because then that gives rise to Alexander. Because Alexander was a student of history, and he took offense at the Persian invasion of Greece. And so he spent, whether that was his ultimate motive, the biographies and things that exist, they're slanted, right? Who knows? It could be he just wanted to take over the world, and Persia was in the way. Or it could be that he legitimately resented what Persia did to his people when they invaded. I don't know. But that was what would lead him. And we saw this in chapter 8 with the ram and the he-goat, and how the he-goat, you remember, rushed at the ram with a fury. Okay? That's what's taking place here. And so it says, then a mighty king shall arise, that's Alexander, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And he did. No one stood in his way. Well, people did. They just didn't survive it. And as soon as he is arisen, that is when he reaches the top of his power, and he's only in his early 30s, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, which is something we've already seen in chapter 8 and verse 8. It says, but not to his posterity, because his two children are murdered, his half-brothers murdered. And so, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. That is, no one... Okay, so going way back in school to history, you remember that Greece was rarely ever a united nation, right? Independent city-states that ruled and warred with each other. Alexander was the first to unite them. Okay? Now, he did it through war, but he united them. And that lasted a very short time. And then it split up amongst his generals. So when he says that these people will rule, but not with the authority with which he ruled, that's because nobody would ever serve over the whole united empire the way he did. Okay? For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. All right? So Persia falls, Alexander falls, and now Greece is just broken up. And they own more land, but they're still as divided as they always were. Okay? Now, this is where we get into much less familiar people. But the main point, again, keep in mind, is Ptolemies and Seleucids, they're going to war with each other. So the king of the south, which would be the Ptolemies, okay? I'm not even going to go into which one, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and there are at least 7 of them mentioned in this chapter. So the king of the south, the Ptolemy, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger, and he shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Okay? After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north, these are the Seleucids, and shall make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up in her attendance, and he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Okay, so summary statement, this is what happens. they decide to have an alliance. The king of the south, the Ptolemies, he gives his daughter Bernice over to the Seleucid king, right? Alliances classically have been through marriage, on up even to modern times. So the Seleucid king is married to a lady named Laodice. Think Laodicea, okay? In the New Testament, a city. A lot of cities are named after people. So he's married to Laodice, has 2 children. He divorces her in order to marry Bernice. Well, that lasts about 2 years. And he's like, this isn't really working for me anymore, so Laodice has Bernice killed, and he marries Laodice back. So what do you have? Well, war is going to start again. You killed a king's daughter. It's just going to start all over again. So there was an attempt to try and bring them together, but ultimately it didn't stick, okay? So in verse 7 it says, "And a branch from her roots, one shall arise in his place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north." The fortress of the king of the north, these Antiochus, the city of Antioch. "He shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt," that is the king of the south, "will take the gods of the kings of the north and metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, 40,000 talents." And 40,000 talents is obviously not in the text. I'm just giving you the historical marker. "And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then at the latter time, then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land." Okay, so this is one of the first exchanges of war, where the south invades the north, and they steal their gods and their money, and they take it back to Egypt with them. Okay? So the people in the north do what? Well, I'm going to get it back. Well, they didn't. Okay? They went, they got whipped, and they went back home. Okay? So what we're seeing is basically the history of the world, nations constantly fighting each other. Okay? Now, in verse 10, it says, "His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through again, shall carry war as far as his fortress. The king of the south," these are the Ptolemies, "moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north." So they're at war again. "And he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand." This is about 217 BC. "And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. And after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies." Okay? Again, we're watching an exchange take place, right? Each one decides, "No, I think I can beat them this time. I'm going to take an army." Well, that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to try it again. And the reason why he tries it again is because one of the kings of the south dies suspiciously, and his infant son, I say infant, 4 to 6 years old, is made king. Well, that would tend to say that it's probably a pretty weak moment in the nation, so it would be a good time to strike. So that's what's going on, okay? So 14, it continues this discussion. It says, "In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail." The violent among your own people, I think, is reference to Jewish people being involved in these wars that take place. Verse 15, it says, "Then the king of the north," this would be an Antiochus, not Antiochus IV, this would be Antiochus III, which of course is the father of Antiochus IV. "The king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city." This is the city of Sidon, okay? The city of Sidon, in the port city in Phoenicia. Mentioned in the New Testament, mentioned in the Old Testament. Pretty well-known city. "And the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand." So the north is defeating the south. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. The glorious land is almost always a reference to Palestine. Okay? So we're talking about the nation of Israel. He shall set his face to come with strength, the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Okay, so this is what happens. When it says, he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Antiochus gives his 16-year-old daughter Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy V. Okay? He thinks, I send my daughter, she marries this man in the south, she can help me undermine him. The only problem is it backfires. She doesn't undermine her husband, she supports him and turns her back on her father. Okay? Same old story. I mean, if you've ever even just watched 30 seconds of a documentary on the History Channel, this stuff happens all the time in all different forms. That's what's going on right now. Verse 18, afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him, and then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. So this is Antiochus IV's father, who has a great deal of strength, and then he meets an army that is stronger than him, that puts him under tribute, which means he has to pay him money every year, like a lot of money every year. Okay? But he ends up dying. Then in verse 20 it says, then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute to the for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. This is Antiochus IV. The guy who, he's technically not in line for the throne, but he takes it. Okay? So this gets us to him. Again, there were names for all these peoples and battles and other things, but you get the gist when I say this one fought this one, and then he's like, oh yeah, and then came back. And it's almost like watching schoolyard boys fight, really. That's basically what's going on. And the people of Israel are caught in the middle. And now they've got a guy who is going to be extremely hostile toward them, as opposed to some of the others. All right, so in 22, or the end of 21, it says, He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. So he finagled his way into the position. It wasn't his by in their minds, the right of succession. So armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, and even the prince of the covenant. Now the prince of the covenant, most likely, we're talking about the covenant, the prince of the covenant would be most likely a reference to the high priest of the nation of Israel. Okay? And some more details of this will be revealed in just a minute. But basically, he turned the priesthood political. Okay? He was the first person. So under the Persians, I mean, you had Persian law, but as long as you paid your tribute, basically what ruled the nation was whatever its religious system was. Okay? So with a shift here, Ptolemy is the first one that begins selling the priesthood. Okay? Now, why is that significant? Because when you come to the New Testament, the men who are serving in the high priest, they're men who bought it. Not that they were qualified for it, they bought it. That's why the Sanhedrin was not 71 members, it was 72. They had reached a compromise of the 70 elders the Jewish chosen high priest and the Roman appointed high priest. 72 members. Okay? That all starts here, when he sells it off and has one of them even murdered, one of the high priests even murdered in the process. I've got like 2 minutes, so let's... and that's Onias III was his name. He was assassinated in 171 BC. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall be strong with a small people. That is, Antiochus will be strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province. That is, he would conquer rich places like Egypt and many other important cities in the surrounding area. And he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He was known, one of the very few kings who was known to, when he plundered people, he would travel through the cities and he would throw gold and all different types of valuable jewels out of his chariot to the people. He tried to buy their loyalty. Okay, it says, he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south. Well, you knew it was coming. It was inevitable. They always fight each other. He's a king of the north. Well, it's time to go to the south now. With a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plot shall be devised against him. That is, the Ptolemies lose this battle. Even those who eat his food shall break him away. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Okay? So we'll stop there, but the main premise up to this point is this. Antiochus is extremely powerful. He's incredibly gifted. He has only a small following, but is able to finagle his way into the right position, small armies, able to beat superior armies, and he buys the affection of the people. He's very slick. Okay? And he's even now gone south and has won. Okay? When we pick up, we'll see how that luck doesn't really continue. And then we'll be introduced to how that, how he begins to be hostile toward the people of God, which fits into really the main point of what all this is about, is how they're supposed to respond to that. All right? Any questions or anything? So remember, Daniel 11, 2 boys just going at it, basically. North and south, north and south, north and south. I'll show you. Nope, I'll show you. Whoop, nope. That's what it is, okay? All right, we'll pick up there next week.